All right, everyone. Thank you very much for your patience, and welcome to the Qdabra webinar. Today we're going to be talking about a relatively new Microsoft product called PowerApps. And we've been using PowerApps here for the past few months, and we wanted to share what we've learned about this great new product from Microsoft. And this is going to be a part one of a two-part webinar. Today I'm just going to give you very basics of PowerApps. We're going to go over the PowerApps designer and give you a feel for that, and we're going to look at a very simple app that interacts with a SharePoint list. But first, I would like to launch a quick poll to get an idea of what your experience is with PowerApps. So we've got a good idea of the audience that we're gearing this towards. If you could go ahead and fill out that poll real quickly. And while you guys are doing that, I just want to let you know that our upcoming webinars, next week's webinar will be about using InfoPath forms, creating overlays in InfoPath forms. It's an interesting technique that we've been using here for a couple of years. And then the following week after that, we'll be having part two of the PowerApps demo, and that'll drill down a little deeper, focus on some more complicated stuff, and look a little closer at data connections. All right, it looks like we've got answers from most of you. So about 3/4 of you have never used it, which is great. So this presentation will be geared perfectly for you. And about 1/4 of you have used it once. So you're probably already a little familiar with the PowerApps layout. That's fine. You'll probably still get something out of this as well. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So what is PowerApps? Well, this is a Microsoft software as a service tool that is geared towards creating mobile applications. And with PowerApps Designer, you can build apps that will run natively in the Windows environment, Android, and iOS. And that's the iPhone and iPad environments. And all you do is design a single application, and then when you deploy that application, it will run on all of those mobile environments. It's nice, it's similar to InfoPath in that you can design clean and simple layouts, you can connect controls to your data, and you can do all of this without code. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be referencing various design elements of InfoPath, which I'm assuming most of you are already familiar with, since InfoPath is one of our core products here at Qdabra. You can combine data from multiple sources. You can have a single app displaying information or data from a SQL table, from a SharePoint list, information from Outlook, all sorts of different data sources that you can combine into a single application. For those of you who are power users, there are a whole host of functions that you can combine into powerful formulas to do all sorts of things with your data sets. That we're not really going to delve deeply into that since this is just an introductory presentation, but I believe the part two will go a little deeper into what you can do with your data. When you're done designing your apps, you can share them with others, and you can set up what Microsoft calls environments. An environment basically defines who can use your application, who will see the application, and when they open up the PowerApps client application on their mobile device, it defines what apps they see and what apps they're able to use and interact with. I do want to note that PowerApps is actively under development, and they are adding new features all the time and making changes all the time. So it is best to check the forums regularly for new features and newly supported data sources. In the last slide in this presentation, I'll have some links that you can use to browse the forum and read up a little more about PowerApps and its development. All right, so how do you get started with PowerApps? Well, what you do, you either download the PowerApps Designer if you are working on a Windows machine, or, and this is really great for those of us who don't have Windows machine, you can use the web version of PowerApps. There are a couple of limitations. It's not quite as robust as the standalone Windows version, but you can still do a lot with it. And everything that we're going to be looking at today, you can definitely do in the web version, although I'm going to be using the standalone. You can connect, as I said before, to many, many different sources: SharePoint, Outlook, Azure, SQL databases, OneDrive, Salesforce, Dynamics 365. You can even manipulate Excel spreadsheets. In general, for those of you who are a little more technically minded, any REST API that supports JSON and uses authentication, you can connect to in PowerApps. Now, obviously, I'm going to throw in the caveat that PowerApps is changing all the time, and so if you have a particular API you've designed, it may not work with PowerApps out of the box. You may have to wait for them to make a few more updates and a few more iterations of PowerApps, but that is a general rule. One big difference between PowerApps and InfoPath is that it does not include query support. So in InfoPath, you're probably used to including data sources and then querying them so that, if you have a SQL database that has hundreds or even thousands of entries, you don't want to pull all of those entries back into your form. That will slow down performance. In PowerApps, you don't have query support. What PowerApps does is, if you want to filter or sort your data, not sorting, but if you want to filter or pull back only a portion of your data, what it does is it delegates certain parts of your filtering function to the server so that it's not always pulling those hundreds or thousands of rows in your SharePoint list or your SQL table back into the application on your little mobile device. It will do some of that filtering on the server and then pull it back. So it's sort of like, instead of you being able to determine what you're querying on, PowerApps just analyzes your function or your formula and says, okay, we're going to execute these actions on the server and only pull back the records that match that, and then we're going to do all the rest of the filtering here in the app. Now, they do support a good many, delegation is supported by a good number of data sources and functions. SharePoint and SQL are supported. Those are the two data sources, I believe, that are getting a pretty heavy usage in PowerApps so far. However, at the end of this presentation, I have a link where you can go read up on the official PowerApps delegation page for info on what's currently supported, what data sources are supported, as well as what functions are currently supported. The PowerApps Designer layout, it's not too different. I misspelled two there. Sorry about that. That's what I get for making last-minute slide edits early in the morning. But the layout is not too different from InfoPath Designer, and it supports many of the same controls you've come to know and love in InfoPath. If you've ever used a mobile design platform like Xcode, the layout will look pretty similar to that. For any of you who have programming experience in the mobile application arena. I've just put a little table in here comparing various terms in InfoPath to various terms in PowerApps. You can get a feel for things. InfoPath, as you know, has the design pane where you drag and drop all the controls and arrange them. In PowerApps, we've got the same thing. It's the layout pane. In InfoPath, your sort of unit of viewable space is called the view. In PowerApps, these are called screens. In InfoPath, as you're arranging things on the view, you use different sections or groups. In PowerApps, we've got galleries, we've got forms, we've got data card containers. InfoPath, on the right-hand side, you have the fields pane that lists all of the fields in your schema. In PowerApps, we have a navigation bar that lists things in sort of a hierarchical order that looks a lot like an InfoPath schema. You've got, like I said, you've got a lot of the same controls: buttons, text box, drop-downs, list box, check boxes, radio buttons. PowerApps has all these same controls, but they also have some cool new ones like toggles and sliders. There's a star rating system, timer. You can even view PDF files, import and export files, and you can even embed videos into PowerApps. So there are a lot of newer controls that actually really lend themselves to the mobile environment. So you can see PowerApps is really aiming to maximize the utility of the mobile environment. As far as rules, these are executed slightly differently. Instead of designing action rules, adding action rules to your controls or your schema fields like you do in InfoPath, in PowerApps, every control has a built-in property called onSelect. Whatever formula you put in there, some of them also have onChange as well. So they've got these built-in properties that will execute various functions when the value of a control changes or when a particular a value is selected from a control or a button is clicked. As far as InfoPath, you're used to adding formatting rules. Again, in PowerApps, these are built-in properties. Each control has a set of built-in properties, and some of them pertain to formatting. So that's how you would affect the formatting of a particular control. For example, in InfoPath, you all know about the hide show rules probably. Use that little checkbox at the bottom where you can choose to hide a rule depending on a certain condition. In PowerApps, we have a visibility property that will allow you to input a formula that determines when that formula is true, when it evaluates to true, then that particular control will be visible. So you can see that it's got a lot of the same functionality as InfoPath. It's just in different places and it runs a little differently. When you are done building your app, in order to deploy it, you publish it to an environment that you've set up. An environment is just an admin defined domain. It determines who can use your app, who can access the data sources that it uses. Okay, so that's just talking through some of the basics of SharePoint Designer, of PowerApps Designer. So we're going to walk through a quick demo where I'm going to walk you around the PowerApps design environment, and then we're going to put together a simple app that connects to a SharePoint list. It allows you to filter, browse the data from the list, filter the data that gets pulled back, and then view individual list items and also add new list items, edit list items, and then save those changes back to SharePoint. One more point I wanted to make about the difference between InfoPath and PowerApps. With InfoPath, you have a lot of data that lives in the form itself. So it's, as you probably know, it's an XML-based tool, and your data lives in the form in an XML format. PowerApps, it looks a lot like a form, but there's no data being saved in the actual app. The app is really an interface to the data that you have elsewhere. You can save or manipulate data, create your own containers, your own sort of data blobs in PowerApps, but it's primarily a mobile interface to data that you already have stored somewhere else. It's allowing you to manipulate and to view that data and to edit that data, but you're not saving that data to a PowerApp form that you're then exporting somewhere. So I just want to point out that difference. It's a pretty fundamental difference. Okay, so let's get to the fun part. Let's switch. Oops, I forgot to close my sample app, so pretend you're not seeing any of this right now. Just close your eyes for a second while I go ahead and close this out. It is being, hold on, it's being a little persnickety. There we go. Sorry, my mouse is jumping around today. Okay, so when you open PowerApps, I'm already logged in under my username. So this is my default environment, and this environment is connected to various resources at Qdabra. So I'm going to actually open up a new app. As you see here, there are many existing apps that I could choose to open up and explore. Some of these are sample apps that come bundled with PowerApps. And I do encourage you, if you have PowerApps on your computer or if you have a SharePoint online instance that will allow you to use PowerApps Web, I encourage you to check them out and browse through them. It's a good way to get an idea for what PowerApps could do, and also some of the more complicated formulas as well. But I'm going to open up a new app, and in here PowerApps does some really nice things. It sets you up with some basic templates. So instead of down here, you can still start with a blank canvas that will come with no data connections, no controls, nothing. There are also some app templates if you wanted to, like for example, design an expense report or something like that. They have built-in templates for that. Or you can just start, if you have a data set that you definitely want to manipulate and you want to be in total control of the layout, you can start with the data here. So let me see if there are any other examples. Nope, that's just connections. Okay, so I am going to start with a SharePoint data template. And as you can see, one limitation of PowerApps right now is if you start with these preloaded data templates, you can only design it in the phone layout. If you want something that can be in a tablet layout, you're going to have to either start with a blank app or one of the pre-designed app templates. So that's just a limitation right now. I believe that PowerApps team is planning to add the option to have a tablet layout for all of these data loaded templates in the future. At any rate, we're going to design we're going to start with the SharePoint data template. So I'm going to go ahead and click this. And it is going to ask me what SharePoint site I want to connect to. So I'm going to type in the URL to the site that contains my data. And as you can see over here, there are a whole bunch of existing connections. These are data collections that I have already connected to before and used those in previous demos and various apps that I've already built. So those connections are saved in PowerApps, so you don't have to consistently type in that SharePoint URL if it's the same site that you've used before. But I'm just going to do everything from scratch to show you guys what that's like. So I've typed in my SharePoint site, and then it's going to give me a list of SharePoint lists that are already on that site. I'm going to click the employee info list, which is the one I'm going to use for this. Click connect. And now PowerApps is actually building a sample app around the data in that SharePoint list that I just selected. So this is pretty nifty because it's going to give you some built-in screens and controls in that screen, and then you have the option of adding them and updating them. Oops, all right, it looks like, all right, apologies guys, my PowerApps just crashed. So hold on a second and I will pull it up again. All right, give me 1 second here and let me pull that up again. I'm going to try switching over to the web version here in a few seconds. It's currently building the app, and fingers crossed that the web version will stay up and running. All right, it looks like the web version is working, so thank you very much for your patience there. All right, so I have created an app based on that SharePoint list, and as you can see, PowerApps has already added several elements. So over here on the left is that navigation screen, that navigation pane that I was talking about. And remember how I said kind of the basic unit of viewable space in PowerApps is the screen. So over here you'll see that there are 3 screens, and PowerApps has given these default names. You are of course free to change these names. If you click on the little dots here next to any of these names, you'll see that you have the option to rename the screen. You can also delete it. If you want to add a new screen, you go up here to the Home ribbon and click New Screen. And again, PowerApps has given us some sort of these nice templates, so you can create a nice blank screen, a nice blank view for you to add controls to. Or you can create a scrollable screen, which has a built-in scroll on the side so that you can continue adding controls past the viewable space on the mobile device. And then you can also add what's called a list screen, which will allow you to view basically a list of data or a table of data. Or you can add a form screen, which allows you to view details about an individual record or an individual item in your list, and also to edit that depending on how you set the properties. So those are the basic types of screens that you can add. If I drill down, let's take a look at this first screen that I have here. You'll notice that there are several different types of elements on this screen. Let me zoom in a little bit here so you can see this a little better. Sorry for the reduced real estate in the browser. So the basic element that is on this particular browse screen is called a gallery, and this particular gallery has been auto-named Browse Gallery 1. Again, you can change that name however you like. And a gallery is basically a container that allows you to view a list of items. That's it. It's a custom, or sorry, it's a data type that is specific to PowerApps. The closest analogy to something in InfoPath would be a repeating group that shows all of the rows in your list or all of the records in your table. But this is very specific to PowerApps. And as you'll see over here, PowerApps has sort of auto-populated, it's done auto-arrange the format of this particular gallery. Each one of these rows is an individual list item in the list that I've connected to. And in this particular gallery, there are several additional elements. There's a separator which separates all of the elements in the list. It's just that horizontal line. There is a next arrow that the default function of this, it's essentially a button. In PowerApps, you can add button functionality to icons. It's sort of the same thing as an image button in InfoPath. And this particular one is set up to take you to a different screen. It's like switching to a different view. And that view will be preloaded with additional details about this particular list item. There are also a couple of text fields, or rather label fields. And these fields contain data that PowerApps thought was the most important data. That's why it's preloaded it here. And it's auto-named these body, subtitle, and title. Let's take a look at the title one. As you can see, if I zoom in here a little more, you'll see it's pre-populated with this number. And to see exactly what the properties are for this particular title label, we're going to go over here to the options pane, and you'll see that it says the content of this particular label control is from the SharePoint list that's backing this whole app. And down here we see the title, the particular title label for this gallery is set to the employee ID field. So I really don't think employee ID should be the title of the individual list items in this gallery, I would rather have the name of the employee. As you may tell from the name of the list, employee info, this is just a list of employees and their information. So I would like to see the full name at the top of that. So I'm going to change. And as you see, PowerApps has this sort of nice auto preview thing. In any action that can be executed on the client side will sort of pop up here without you having to actually enter PowerApps preview mode, which I'll show you a little bit later after we've gone through the details of these different screens and their elements. You also, so these are the options for this particular, for the layout of the gallery and all the list items in them. You also have an advanced menu on this options pane, and this is where you really get into all of the properties associated with each one of these controls. As you can see, you have all sorts of different elements. Here is that onSelect action that I mentioned. Right now it's set to false. This is the default value for most controls, so if the user taps on this or clicks on this, nothing will happen. The text that appears in this particular title element is set to this item.title. This item is the current list item that pertains to this particular row in the gallery. So this is a built-in PowerApps function. This is how you access the particular elements of the current item, sort of like the current function in InfoPath, if you're looking for an analogy to InfoPath there. And there are all sorts of different options, and these allow you to access more properties. I won't go through all of these. Obviously, you can select all sorts of different colors for different states of the app. You can give it a border. You can fill it with pretty colors. Here's a font size property, font weight. Can it italicized, underline, strike through? Do you want the label to have any padding? Should it be aligned left, center, vertical? And also across here, you'll see across here the ribbon at the top. You can also access a good number of these properties, not all of them, but you can see the bold, italicized, font, adjustment, alignment rather. You can also manually set where this particular element appears, its X and Y height values, the width, the height of the entire box. And here's that visible property that I said was analogous to the hide show formatting rule. So right now it's set to true. This is the default. So this field will always appear when the browse screen is visible on screen. You can set this to all sorts of formulas to have conditional visibility, very similar to hide show rules. And you also have a tab index like a lot of InfoPath controls have as well. You can also, there's also a disabled property as well, again analogous to InfoPath. So you can really manipulate these controls with a lot of the same granularity that you could if you were designing an InfoPath form. Okay, so this is the Browse Gallery. You can add additional elements to this. You would get to that on the Insert tab at the top. As you can see, I can add a label, I can add a button, I can add a text control, and here's where you would access all of the other different controls I mentioned, drop-downs, date pickers, checkboxes, radio buttons, and all of the other cool new elements. We don't have time to go into them there, but definitely feel free to check those out on your own time. So, okay, that's all I really want to say about the Browse Gallery. There is a header at the top of this view. It has a bunch of preloaded buttons. Let me quickly go over those. This is simply a refresh. And again, these are icons that were inserted, and every icon has an onSelect action property associated with it. That's how you turn them into buttons. So this one is set to refresh the employee info data source when it's clicked. Here we have one that is set to sort using the update context, function, rather. And you may notice, if you've done any sort of functions in Excel, you may notice a similarity with the naming and the formatting of the function calls. That's not a coincidence. It's PowerApps functions were based on the Excel format. And here we have a button that creates a new item. So you'll see this is actually two different actions combined into this one on select property. And so the way to execute multiple actions in PowerApps is to separate them with a semicolon. So you'll see a little semicolon in the middle here. This is analogous to creating an action rule in InfoPath and having multiple actions on a single rule. You cannot do multiple rules, it's just multiple actions because on select is really the only built-in rule that you have for a built-in action rule that you have for a property in PowerApps. So the first action that's being executed is new form, and this is actually taking you to another special PowerApps control called a form. And form is how you either view or edit an individual item in your list, an individual record in your database. And we'll look at that next because the second action on this particular icon button is the navigate, and navigate is how you move between different screens in your app. So this action rule is saying let's create a new form, which is going to essentially allow you to create a new item and add that item to the list. And then the second action is take me to the screen where that new form lives. So let's go ahead and take a look at that screen. And that's right, there are actually two of them. So we're going to look at the edit screen. As you can see, this navigate property takes you to edit screen 1. So let's take a look at edit screen 1 and see what that contains. And here is the pre-built edit screen, and it contains a particular type of form called an edit form. And this is a PowerApps control that displays editable controls for every element in your list. And it will preload the screen with the name of the particular field, as well as a control which defaults to text box, but you can change this if you would rather have a drop down. Perhaps for job title, you don't want people to be able to type in any old job title. You want them to select from a certain number of job titles. You could change that text box to, you could replace that text box with a drop down control instead. You can replace them with check boxes. Any of the basic controls can replace these default text boxes. And so this is the edit form that is built. And once you're done typing in whatever information you want for this new item, you would click, again, another pre-constructed icon button. And this one calls the submit form action. And the submit form action takes all the values that you've entered into this edit form control, and it submits them back to the list. All right, so that's the edit form control. Let's quickly look at the last remaining screen in this pre-built app. That is the detail screen, and this contains the other type of form control called a detail form. And what this allows you to do is simply view the items, view all of the details about a particular item in your list or a particular record in your table. It's exactly the same as the edit form, except instead of editable controls, all your data is displayed in labels. That's the basic difference. All right, so let's take a look at this app in action, and then I'm going to make a couple of edits. So we're going to start up here at the top. These are the undo, redo buttons for all of the different actions you've taken in Designer. There's a help screen, and also there's a little play button which allows you to run preview. So I'm going to click that play button, and here you see the home screen in this Power App, and it's pulling back all the information in my list right now. I am going to select the last element in this list. I'm going to click the next button that allows me to view item details. And this takes me to that detail form that allows me to view but not edit any of the information. I'm going to click a button up here that will take me, this will allow me to edit the item. What this is going to do is switch to that edit form view that we looked at in Designer. with the same information that I'm currently looking at. So now I have an editable form, and I'm going to change this. We're going to pretend this is a typo. I should really be employee B. This is the card for employee B. And I'm going to click this button to submit this information back to the list. So let's take a quick look at the list real quickly. Oops, that's right. Let me open up the list itself. That was how I opened up the webinar demo. So let's take a quick look at the list beforehand. Should load up here in a few seconds. And you'll see, here we go, employee B currently has the wrong email address. It says employee AB. So over here in PowerApps, I'm going to edit that to employee.b and click submit. And that submit button not only submits to the list, but it has an additional action on it that switches back over to the detail form view, the read-only view. And now if I go over here and refresh this list, you will see that the email address for employee B has been updated accordingly. And there we go. The email address has been updated to employee B. So instantaneous updating of the data source behind your app. All right, let me close out of this, and I'm going to do one small edit. One element I did not go over on this browse screen is the search bar. This allows you to search items. We're just going to gloss over that. There's just too much to cover in this introductory app. One thing I want to do is add a new screen and add a control to that, and then show how you can filter a list based on a value from a drop-down. Very simple action. So I'm going to insert a new screen, scrollable screen, which is just sort of my default because I never know if I want to come back and add more controls to the screen. I want it to be scrollable so that when the app is used, I don't have to worry about fitting everything on the screen real estate. All right, so I'm going to add an item to this. I'm going to add a drop-down control. And when you add a new control, a lot of times these controls will come pre-populated with just sort of a dummy data set. So the first thing I want to do is change this data set to reflect the information I actually want to be in the drop-down. And I tend to do this a lot on the Advanced tab. I believe if I click on the options, okay, no options available. So in order to change the data source, you do have to go to the Advanced tab for this drop-down. And I'm going to go down here to drop-down sample. This is just a sample data set that comes with every drop-down you throw on the form. And I'm going to change this to my employee info. And PowerApps has this nice autocomplete feature. So if I just start typing employee info, you'll see it pops up down there in the search results. So I'm going to select the employee info data source. So that's my data source, and I want to pick a value, in other words, a column from my list that I want to appear in here, and I want the, where did I go? Company. I want to pick company. All right, so this drop down is going to show, and we should see this, there we go, sort of that auto-updating, auto-preview mode. So this drop-down is now going to show all of the company values that are in all the company values in the list. So let's go ahead and preview that and see what happens. All right, so there we are. Here's our drop-down. But as you can see, we've got a whole bunch of repeated values in here. You may recognize this from using a drop-down in InfoPath. There is actually a special checkbox that you have to check on the drop-down control in InfoPath to keep that from happening when you read in your values from an external data source. Similarly, in PowerApps, we have to modify our data items function so that we only want it to display unique values. And the function to use for that, I'm going to go up here in the function bar and edit this. The formula for that is, or the function for that is called distinct. So I am going to, and another nice thing about PowerApps, if you type a formula into this formula bar at the top, it'll give you a quick definition of what it is and what you can do with it, and also the formatting for the particular function. So I know that my data source comes first, and the next thing is an expression that tells me how I want to manipulate that data source. And I happen to know in this case, in order to get only distinct values for the company name, I simply type that company field in there. So now, when I preview this, it should only have 2 values in there. There we go. All right, so we've got that drop-down set up. And the next thing I want to do is basically tell that browse screen that had the gallery on it, I only want to display entries for which that match the company that I've selected in this drop-down. And I'm going to do that by going to the Browse Gallery, and I'm going to modify this super complicated formula in here. I won't go into what this formula is doing. I'll provide a link at the end of the presentation where you can read up on all of the different formulas and definitely go through the sample apps and browse the forums to see exactly what you can do. So all I'm going to do is note that there is already a filter function built into this. I'm just going to change what it's filtering on. So instead of filtering on the content of the text box, the search box at the top, I am going to filter based on the value of that drop-down. Now I just happen to know that that drop-down that was inserted is auto-called drop-down 1. Just trust me on this. If you switch back over to that view, you will see that it is called drop-down 1. So all I'm going to do here is filter on employee info such that company equals drop-down 1 dot, and again it's giving me these auto-selected properties, drop-down 1 dot selected dot value. Oops, and I clicked out of the Browse Gallery, that's why the formula disappeared. So there we go. This is the newly modified formula to determine what's displayed in the gallery. And one last thing we have to do is get from screen 1 to that browse screen. And I'm going to do this with a button because I like buttons. Oops. I accidentally added 2 buttons, so let me delete one of them. There we go. All right, and now I have a button. And on this button, I'm just going to have a simple navigate action. So I am going to go to the action under advanced again, and on select right now is set to the default value false. I am going to enter a navigate function. There is my navigate function, and again it gives me a list of all of the screens in my app, so I don't even have to remember the name. I'm going to switch to the browse screen. That's the one that has the gallery. And there's an optional transition. You can decide how you want to transition from screen to screen. I'm just going to pick fade. You can pick none. It doesn't really matter. Okay, and of course I don't want to just call this button because that's bad form. So I'm going to enter go. All right, so now we have the additional screen where if we select a value for company from the drop-down and click go, then the gallery on the browse screen, which is the screen we'll switch to, should show only the items for that particular company. So let's go ahead and give this a whirl in preview. I'm going to leave this at the default selected Qdabra value. I'm going to click go, and you will see this time we only have 2 items in the browse gallery. Now one thing we forgot to do, and that I'm actually not going to do because this webinar is running a little long, is get back to the original screen if I wanted to select a different company. I could insert an icon that I could insert an icon on this browse screen and then simply connect it to another navigate action. I would navigate back to screen 1. So that is a basic introduction to PowerApps. I'm sure you have many questions, and I apologize for ignoring them. It's a little easier to just get through the demo in one piece. Let me go ahead and take a look at some of the questions that we've got here. Will PowerApps run without an internet connection? If you're pulling in data from a remote source, then no. You do need to have an internet connection to the server where your SQL tables are stored, where your SharePoint list is stored, or whatever other data sources you're using. As far as deploying to users, I didn't actually plan on covering that in this particular webinar. Sorry about that. There was a lot to show just for the PowerApps interface and how to the designer and all of the different controls. I apologize for that. I will add some information on that to the presentation. And and thank you, Hillary, for giving us some additional information on PowerApps running without an internet connection. And deploying to users, so I answered the deploying to users question. Sorry about that. I'll include some information in the presentation. Where are the edit permissions specified? The permissions to edit, so if you include an edit screen in the app, everyone that has access to that app will have the ability to edit. So permissions are specified at the app level. And Hillary, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe it is specified at the app level. So whatever permissions your app allows people to do, anyone who has access to that app will have the ability to edit that.
Yeah, this is Hillary. So I'm not sure if that question had to do with the ability to edit items using the app, or if the question had to do with permissions to allow somebody else to edit the app you created. So Dick, if you could maybe clarify.
Yeah,
you see what I'm
a
saying?
good question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I couldn't understand whether the question was referring to within the app, am I allowed to edit things, or yeah. Okay.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. As far as editing specific app, anyone you share the app with in the environment, anyone who has access to that environment will be able to edit that particular app, I believe. But I need to check up on the permissions model. Since we're getting questions about permissions, Hillary, it might be a good idea to go into that in a little deeper in the section 2 that's coming in 2 weeks on PowerApps. Will PowerApps work with SharePoint 2010? I'm not sure specifically about SharePoint 2010. I do know that you can interact, you can pull back data from SharePoint on-premises, so this is not limited to SharePoint Online. And I believe that it does SharePoint 2013 as well as SharePoint 2010. But off the top of my head, I'm not sure if it goes back to SharePoint 2010. I don't see any reason why not. But it definitely allows you to use on-premises, interact with data that's stored on on-premises SharePoint. Okay, and Dick clarified, thank you, editing the data content. So yes, so anyone who has access, if you have an edit screen in a particular app, anyone who has access to that particular app will be able to use the edit screen. It's possible you may be able to do some things with hide show. For example, if you have a list of users, or you have a data connection to, say, Outlook, and all of the users that belong to a particular category or particular group in Outlook, you could set up something on visibility for the button that takes you to the edit form. You could set up some sort of formula there so that if that person belongs to that particular Outlook group, if the current user belongs to that Outlook group, then show the edit button, and then that will take them to the edit form. But you'd have to specifically do something, set up your formulas on the navigation between screens to account for that. Is there a person picker control in PowerApps? I haven't seen one, although I haven't looked for one. Hillary, do you know if there's a people picker control? I don't believe so. Let me take a quick look since I have this still up. I don't think there's a people picker control in here. Yeah, no people picker control. But let me look and see. I'm sure it's probably one of the requested controls. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, PowerApps is under development, and there are several features that are being added, every other month, depending on who's requesting them.
Yeah, it looks like
I've got
it's planned. It looks like it's planned based on what I see on the request for that. I'll paste that in.
Okay, great. And I do have a link at the end of the presentation where you can go on the PowerApps forums and request new features. And basically they add things depending on the demand. So if a whole bunch of you go over there after this webinar and all request a people picker, that'll help push that up the list of desired features. Oops, what did I do with the questions pane? Let's see. All right, I think we got to all of the questions there, with the exception of the deployment one, and I can include some information about deployment in the slides, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about that a little more in the second iteration of this webinar in 2 weeks. All right, well, I'd like to thank you all for attending the webinar, and as I said, you'll get some useful links to the PowerApps community. I found this very useful, especially if you're trying to figure out a formula to do some complicated filtering and sorting on your various data sources. There's almost always someone who's run into that situation or a similar situation, and you can glean some good tidbits from the forums. Here's a link directly to the particular forum for submitting new requests for new features. So go over there afterwards and submit that request for a people picker. I mentioned delegation at the beginning. You can read up a little more about that here. If you don't recall from the beginning, this was about the various filtering actions that get executed server side, so you're not pulling back all of your data into the app and slowing down app performance. And also a reference to all of the different formulas that are supported by PowerApps. You can read up there about all of the various formulas and functions that are supported. All right, thank you very much for attending. There will be a quick poll that gets sent out at the end of the webinar. If you fill that out, you will receive a free copy of the slides later today. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you next week for the webinar on creating overlays in InfoPath, and 2 weeks from now for part 2 of the PowerApps webinar. Thanks a lot, and take care.